Jensen, welcome. It's been a very long time since I've seen you.
I know it, Adam.
And
let's rock the house tonight.
I'm ready. And before we start, I just want to extend an extra special welcome to Table 5. Table 5 back there, you're kind of in a different room from everyone else, but I just wanted you to know that we love you very much. You could show your appreciation for that love. Yeah. All right. Okay, thanks everybody. Welcome.
The wild bunch.
Yeah, they can get kind of nutty back there.
The Deloitte guys, they can get pretty wild.
Jensen, let's jump right into the news, and not your news, but the other guy's news.
Oh, come on.
Intel has had.
This is on the record?
This is on the record. Well, I'm going to move very quickly to Nvidia. Your big competitor has not.
You know, Adam's interviews goes right below the belt immediately. All right, BK, what comes out next from my mouth? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
No, I promise you, this is a softball, which is Intel's had some widely publicized problems, highly technical in nature, in the past week. According to reports, Nvidia has not. My question is, why not? And can we be confident that you won't have those same problems? And if you could just very briefly explain to everybody what this, it's hard to understand because it's not a bug, it's not a glitch, it's a security flaw, right? That they've had.
You're asking me to explain their security flaw.
I'm asking, well, you're the technologist.
Well, you ask. I think right now, as we speak, BK is going to be on stage,
right,
and he's going to be explaining the security flaw. And let's take his word for it. You know, I think let's let him be the last word on this. I think we're in the computing business. We're in the GPU computing business, and we created a type of computing that is able to process information in parallel, and it accelerates the CPU. It sits next to the CPU, and so the security flaw happens on the CPU. And it doesn't happen on our GPU, but you know, in the final analysis, the whole world has to go and patch this up as quickly as possible, and we will, you know, and they will, and so I think this will all be behind us. BK will take care of it.
BK, the Brian Krzanich, the CEO of Intel, but could that sort of thing happen to a GPU in theory?
No, not that type of bug, not that type of.
Okay. Would you give us like 2 minutes on the history of Nvidia? Nvidia is a chip company that is different from the companies that people in the room might have been familiar with over the past couple decades. Give everybody the quick overview, if you would.
We saw that one day it is possible for us to recreate three-dimensional worlds, and it would be incredibly fun to play games in it. And we thought that it would be an incredible technology driver for the next generation of technology company. And the reason why it was going to be such an incredible technology driver was because three-dimensional graphics is incredibly hard to do. It is computationally incredibly hard. And yet the volume could be quite large. The market could be enormous because we thought that someday everybody would be a gamer. And you got to remember that 25 years ago, Electronic Arts was just a startup, and their CTO was, I think, 14 years old. And we both had the same investor, Sequoia Capital. And I remember Don Valentine saying to me, he said, Jensen, I just got one piece of advice and one warning. And the one piece of advice is startups don't depend on startups. And your success depends on the success of Electronic Arts. And they're a startup, and their CTO is 14 years old, and he wears a gold medallion. And I said, I knew that. And then the second thing the second thing was a warning. He says, if you lose my money, I'll kill you. And Don Valentine, as you guys know, is one of the world's greatest investors.
Now, he was giving you a hard time. He was trying to frighten you. Obviously, he was good at that.
Oh no, I was frightened.
Yeah, but you weren't dependent on a startup, I guess, is the point of the story. Is that correct?
Well, you know, it turned out Electronic Arts was 25 years ago, as you guys might remember, the video game industry had collapsed, and it had collapsed because of one singular game. You guys might remember it was called E.T. E.T. the game destroyed the video game industry. And it set back Sega, Nintendo, it set back Atari probably close to a decade. And people got tired of playing video games. And maybe it was just because they were waiting for three-dimensional graphics. And when we came along, we made it possible for 3D graphics to be consumerized. At the time, only Silicon Graphics, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, Apollo, these are giant companies doing three-dimensional graphics simulators. And we thought that it would be amazing if we could figure out a way to consumerize it, turn it into something that you can put into a PC. At the time, the PC had no sound, has no CD-ROM, had no internet, had no modems. And we thought, boy, wouldn't it be great if we can turn this PC into the ultimate consumer computer? And what would you do with an ultimate consumer computer? Well, we didn't think that managing your recipe would be the thing. We didn't think that doing spreadsheet would be the thing. We thought that maybe playing video games would be the thing. And so that's how we got started. And I think the insight, the ultimate insight, was that this was the only technology area where the computational capability was incredible and the market size could be enormous. That this combination just never happens. You have this incredible technology, incredible size of market. This combination just doesn't happen, and I think that was right. 25 years later, it remains true.
And so the interesting thing about where you are now is that this incredibly big market that you went into 25 years ago, which became the consumer gaming market it started as the consumer gaming market on PCs, is relatively small compared to where you're heading now. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so video games is about creating virtual reality. And along the way, we discovered that creating virtual reality and using artificial intelligence to understand physical reality were somehow cousins. And maybe the simple way to think about that, if I ask all of you to close your eyes and I want you to think about a Ferrari. If I ask you to think about a Ferrari, it is very likely that your brain generated a computer graphics image in your brain of a Ferrari. It's very unlikely that it was a whole bunch of words. It's very unlikely that it was a recipe of instructions of how to build one. It's likely an image of a Ferrari. And so your brain is a bit of a, if you will, GPU, you know? And so here we are. We got into the artificial intelligence business.
So in Andrew Neska's very, very lovely, informative, fascinating story about you in Fortune, he quotes an analyst who says that what Nvidia is in the middle of right now.
Changed my life, Andrew. I just got to tell you, I've signed 3 book deals. I'm going to make a movie. Hollywood's on top of it.
He needs a cut.
Yeah.
Where are you, Andrew?
They're fascinated somehow by the school I went to. You know, somehow a criminal grew up to be a CEO.
This was in.
I wasn't a crime.
Portland, right? Oregon?
Kentucky, Oneida, Kentucky.
I don't know how I got
Clay
there.
County, Oneida, Kentucky is the single poorest county in America today. Nothing changed in the 40 years since I've been there, 50 years since I've been there. Yeah, it's been a long.
The point this analyst made in Andrew's article is that we're in the middle of a tectonic shift, and this is what Nvidia is in the middle of. We went from mainframe computers to client-server computers, PCs, smartphones, and now it's all about artificial intelligence. Is that an accurate portrayal? And can you give everybody your vision of what that's going? I want to come to self-driving cars in a moment, but more broadly, what is that going to look like?
Well, the big breakthrough that happened with artificial intelligence started with a particular branch of machine learning called deep learning, and it was about using enormous amounts of data and huge amounts of computational capability to automatically extract the insight from the data. And you give this computer enormous amounts of examples, and it figures out by itself what are the important features. So all the things that you're showing me, and you tell me everything's a chair or everything's a glass of wine, and it figures out what makes it a glass of wine or what makes it a chair. And that breakthrough was obviously significant, and it's solved on first principles. Fundamentally, one area in artificial intelligence that was incredibly hard to solve was perception. How do we take all of this unstructured data, this noisy information from whether it's vision or speech or just sound or pricing trends or signal trends or temperature trends or barometric pressure trends or vibration trends, all this really, really noisy information. How do I learn something from it so that I can predict the next, what's going to happen next?
The next action.
Yeah, so if I saw a whole bunch of sequences of information, what's likely to happen next? Us humans have this incredible ability to recognize patterns and predict what's going to come next. We have the ability to look at a whole bunch of very noisy information and somehow recognize what it is. Perception was a very difficult problem. And if you can't perceive the physical world, you can't ingest the information from the physical world. And so all of a sudden, deep learning has figured out a way for us to perceive visual, audio, and almost any temporal information. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be two-dimensional, it could be sequential, it could be three-dimensional. We could figure out a way to take all that information and discover the insight from it, the most salient features. Okay? And so that was the big breakthrough in artificial intelligence. And now software can write software.
And this is why, so what you've just set up makes it much easier for non-technologists to understand why your technology would go in a self-driving car. Because if a car is being driven not by a human, it needs to perceive what's happening literally down the road. When did it occur to you that this would be a large commercial application for Nvidia's technology?
Well, at the highest level, the way to think about that is we've always believed that robotics was going to be important. And robotics or autonomous machines, computers, machinery that can operate and perform and function autonomously in a complicated environment, we've always felt was going to be a very large market. This is how we're going to bring computers into the physical world. This is how we're going to bring artificial intelligence into the physical world. And the simplest autonomous machine is the self-driving car.
The simplest?
Yeah. Now, of course, it's the most impactful. And the reason for that is mobility is the moving of people and things, and society depends on mobility. But because of all of the years of driving, we've got all kinds of rules and the roads and the systems and the infrastructure is all designed so that even grandmothers and grandfathers can drive, and so kids can drive. With just a 10-minute driver's test, anybody can drive. And so obviously it's a skill that's relatively simple. And now, of course, it's very complicated in the sense that it's easy for you and I to do it. But how do you now take all of this thing called driving skills and codify it into a program that we can then have a machine perform? And that turns out to be incredibly hard. Now that is one level of the complexity, but there are several other levels of complexity. In the final analysis, it's very likely that even something as simple as a self-driving car in the context of autonomous machines will still be the most complex computer system the world's ever done. And the reason for that is because it's obviously driving very fast. The performance of the computer has to be fast. It has to react very quickly. And these computers can't fail. Imagine a computer that can't fail. Mm-hmm. My laptop still hangs after all these years. Right. And so how do you create a computer where when it fails, it detected that it failed, and it will continue to somehow perform its function and drive you safely? So when it fails, it doesn't fail. I mean, that sounds kind of like a weird thing, I want you to build me something that when it fails, it doesn't fail. When it fails, it continues to operate. That's called fail operational. And the airline industry does it through brute force. They have 3 different versions of a computer in a plane. And they're actually designed by 3 different teams.
And they're redundant.
They're redundant and diverse.
Uh-huh.
Because otherwise, if you're redundant, but the same person designed both of them, if there was a functional bug when it happened to both, and so you can't allow yourself systematic failures, and so you have to make sure that it's both redundant and diverse. It's really complicated.
So you're in a commercial fight right now. You made announcements this week about automakers that you're developing self-driving technology with. Given everything you know about the technology, the commercial world, and the policy world, will you give everybody your vision of when we should? Right now, self-driving cars is a de minimis amount of. It's really still in the lab for all effects and purposes. When will that change?
So the mobility industry is large. It's $10 trillion or so. Within it, there are cars and the operations of cars. There are taxis, mobility as a service, trucks, buses, shuttles. And so if you break it all down, I think what you'll find is that starting next year, the one that's the easiest is probably mobility as a service. And the reason for that is because you can contain, geofence the service within a particular area. So you could exhaustively map and exercise and develop your self-driving car within a particular city or a part of a city. And if somebody needs that service outside of that city, you simply don't provide it. And so it's geofenced. For trucks, you might be able to see something within the next couple of years. And the reason for that is because you could be quite productive having a truck driver just be able to extend. They're still in the car, they're still in the truck, but you want to extend their driving range by a couple, 2-3 hours. And during that 2 or 3 hours, they're on the highway. The highway is perfectly safe for them. It's been mapped to death, and they've ran it many times, and they could rest while the truck is driving by itself on a highway.
It's a discrete route.
It's a very discrete route, and when they get to the endpoints, they take control again, and they can apply human intelligence. For cars, we could limit its functionality so that unless it's completely able to drive by itself, it simply doesn't let you go into the mode of self-driving. So there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, and I think that we're going to find that over the next several years, you're going to see car companies, with more and more offerings over time. But the idea of a car that's completely driverless, it drives everywhere, in all conditions, that fantasy car probably won't happen for 5 to 10 years.
5 to 10. I have one more question before I throw it open to the room, which is, can you explain what role your chips play in cryptocurrency mining, and what's your vision for that? Didn't seem that funny to me, but...
No, it's great. So Adam starts with the below the belt and it ends with below the belt. I'm just kidding. Cryptocurrency, I love crypto. Look, blockchain is obviously, you guys know what blockchain is, and it's a ledger up in the cloud, and it's a distributed ledger, and the only way to make transactions with this distributed ledger is transparently and cryptographically, and it's always kept up to date. So it's very difficult to circumvent it, and it is also friction free, practically. Okay, and so blockchain is incredibly important as a database functionality, transaction functionality in the future, and it will affect everything. It'll affect everything. Every single transaction that we do in the future will have some kind of a cryptographically coded public ledger, distributed database in the future. Okay, so I just said something that I think everybody would agree. Cryptocurrency. Whether we like it or not, it's going to be here to stay and be used by some people. And not everybody believes that the greenback is the right currency to use. And cryptocurrency is going to be used.
And cryptographically, meaning there needs to be a picture of this.
Cryptographically, as in there's a very long security code that has to be decoded by the person who receives the transaction.
And this is where...
And that's why it needs a high-performance computer, and that's where our GPU plays a role. These cryptographic codes obviously requires a supercomputer to decode, and our GPU is essentially the world's highest volume, largest installed base supercomputer. And that's the reason why almost everybody who has a new cryptocurrency, a new, if you will, digital currency, launches it on an Nvidia GPU. because we are the world's largest volume, high-performance computing processor.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Questions or comments? I think I probably have one right in the front.
So
Yes, Alan.
let me ask you, Jensen. This is a question that Adam asked, but I'm not sure you quite answered it, so I'm going to try it again. You started a company that was making a chip that was used in super cool video games.
Yeah, right.
And you have ended up running a company that is making a key building block in artificial intelligence, which is going to change everything. It's going to change the world.
Yes.
So at what point did you realize you were not making cool video games, you were changing the world? When did it occur to you that the applications were that fundamental?
February 17th, 1993. And I just turned 30. And there's no point in starting a company unless you want to make a contribution to society. I mean, that's just the simple part of it. It's incredibly hard to start a company. It's incredibly hard to start a business. There's the depth of despair, the suffering, the torturing, balanced by the great joy of doing something the world's never done before. Is beyond words can describe. And so unless you really believe that you're going to make a real contribution to society, it's going to be really hard to go down that journey. Now, we started in video games because we realized this combination that I was talking about. But as quickly as we could, as soon as we started discovering the scale that it provided, we moved into workstations, we moved into high-performance computing, we moved into servers, we moved into supercomputers, into the cloud, and self-driving cars, and you name it. And so it's really 3D graphics and video games is if you will, the engine of innovation in our company, the engine of R&D scale. We're the only company in the world that I know of today that can build a supercomputer processor, invest $4 or $5 billion to do it, and without one single purchase order from a customer, ramp it into $1 billion business. And the reason for that is because we know there are 200 million GeForce customers who are dying to get their hands on the next generation processor. Nobody else can do that. And that gives us incredible scale, incredible latitude. And so it's that observation was dead on, but the idea that we would be a new type of computing company was 25 years old.
Tom?
Hi, I have a question about autonomous cars and the ability of your chips to upgrade the technology in the existing fleet. So if you look at self-driving cars, the fleet's 11 years old. We got just in the U.S. alone, we got $4 trillion tied up in it, so you can't exactly throw that out. Do you see an ability for your chips to upgrade the technology in existing cars so that we could improve the level of autonomous driving? Or is it like a different current and it just won't connect because the technology in the existing fleet's too old?
And Jensen, so Tom Wilson's the CEO of Allstate, so he has a very interesting interest.
Tom and I have met, and Tom, I would say that it's nearly impossible for some types of cars, for example, passenger cars, but in other types of cars, I actually think it could be highly desirable. Let me give you an example. I believe that bolting on these sensor configurations that look very high-tech and arguably ugly is exactly what people want out of taxis. Taxis, police cars, ambulances, I would like them to look different than a disguised Ford Taurus. I would like these special function vehicles to look different. And so if you had a taxi, a robot taxi that actually has all these configurations of sensors around it, it gives me comfort, actually. I actually would have no trouble getting into it. And so for taxis, robot taxis, for trucks, I think it is possible to retrofit it. But I think it's going to be hard to do that for Mercedes or BMW or something like that. the sensors are in the wrong place. They don't have the right sensors. And whether it's cameras, LiDARs, or radars, they tend to be in the wrong place. And so I think that's problematic.
And so just to finish the point, the installed base is massive, right? It's, I don't know, is it hundreds of millions of
No,
vehicles?
it's a billion. I mean,
billion vehicles.
Yeah, a billion cars on the planet, I think it's about a billion cars on the planet, provides for about 15 trillion miles per year. And so I think you mentioned it earlier in your talk, over the course of the next decade or so, we're going to increase population by another billion or so. A billion people, some of them are from developing countries and some of them are young people. And the amount of miles that we're going to contribute to society is another tens of trillions of miles per year. It's not possible to do this with cars. Every single car has 2 or 3 parking spaces, just in case we need a place to park our cars. Right? Every single car in the world has 2 or 3 parking spaces allocated to it. It's just not possible, theoretically possible, to have enough space on Earth to provision for another billion people in society. And so obviously it's got to be some kind of a service. And when you put something into a service, it's going to be, the utilization will be higher. It never needs to stop. And so urban design will change. The more parking spaces will change. And it doesn't say that we're not going to drive anymore. I think for many people for a long time, a billion people for a long time, will continue to have cars that we own. But we probably will drive it less. We probably will buy a better car. We'll probably, they might be more for entertainment than it is for commute. I mean, we might change the way we think about cars. But there's no question that we're going to need some form of mobility as a service.
Jensen, I want to first say congratulations on your success and say thank you for coming here tonight and painting this picture that you've painted. Please join me in thanking Jensen Huang.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Adam.